The pickup slowed down, then kept driving. Caleb locked the doors and said, "Don't get out. Someone's waiting for you." No explanation, no police, just silence, headlights, and one choice: stay inside or step out and disappear. I'm Ethan Brooks. I'm 63 years old, and until last year, I thought I'd already done the hard part of life. I wasn't rich, I never was, but I worked, I showed up, I paid what I owed. For most of my adult life, that was enough. I lived in a mobile home just outside town, close enough to the railroad tracks that you learned the schedule by sound. The early freight at 4:40 a.m., the long one after midnight. At first it's loud, then it becomes a clock. You stop noticing it, the same way you stop noticing your own breathing. I worked nights at a distribution center, nothing fancy. Boxes in, boxes out. My back complained more than it used to, but my hands still did what they were told. I didn't miss shifts. I didn't ask for favors. I kept my head down and my receipts in a folder by the door. People hear mobile home and assume a lot. They imagine failure. They imagine bad decisions stacked on top of each other. But the truth is simpler. I wasn't poor. I just wasn't protected. I made enough to cover rent, gas, groceries, and the insurance I thought would matter. I even had a little set aside, not much, just enough to feel responsible, enough to think I was safe. Then the fires came. Not all at once. At first it was smoke drifting in from the hills, ash on the hood of my car, the sky turning that dull, sick orange that makes everything feel like it's holding its breath. They said it was contained. They always say that. 3 weeks later, evacuation notices went up. The landowner sold the lot. The area was rezoned. My place didn't burn down, but it might as well have. Between smoke damage, cleanup costs, and losing the lease, the numbers stopped working. It didn't feel dramatic. There was no single moment where I dropped to my knees. It was quieter than that. A notice on the door, a deadline, a sentence that ended with, "You have 30 days." That's when people start asking questions. Questions that sound reasonable if you've never lived that close to the edge. Why didn't you have more saved? Why didn't you buy instead of rent? Why didn't you plan better? I used to ask myself those same questions, late at night, sitting on the edge of the bed, doing the math again, like maybe the numbers would apologize if I stared at them long enough. Here's the part most people don't understand. A lot of us live lives where we're doing fine, as long as nothing goes wrong. We're not lazy. We're not reckless. We're just close enough to the margin that one bad month becomes a bad year. I worked steady for decades. Hardware stores, warehouses, seasonal jobs when I had to. I paid into the system. I did what you're supposed to do, but support systems don't always show up when you need them. Paperwork takes time. Benefits lag behind reality. And when you're already scrambling for a place to sleep, eventually feels like a luxury word. People say, "Why not just live out of a van for a while?" I thought about it, I really did. I even looked at a couple listings. But a van isn't cheap when everyone else has the same idea. And once you factor in insurance, repairs, fuel, and where you're legally allowed to park, it stops being a solution and starts being another gamble. At my age, you don't have room for gambles. You don't bounce back the same way. One mistake isn't a lesson, it's a cliff. I'd always believed that if things ever went truly sideways, family would be there. Not to solve everything, just to help you breathe long enough to get back on your feet. That belief had carried me longer than I realized. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. I wasn't missing money. I was missing a buffer, a margin for error. Someone to say, "Stay here, we'll figure it out." Instead, I learned something harder. Most people don't fall because they stop trying. They fall because life finally asks for a payment they can't split into installments. And when that happens, everything you thought was solid gets very quiet, very fast. I didn't know it yet, but that silence was about to get louder. I waited 2 days before calling Marianne, not because I was afraid, mostly because I needed to be sure of what I was asking for. I wasn't calling to borrow money. I wasn't asking her to fix my life. I just needed a place to sit still for a while. A couch, a spare room, somewhere I could put my bag down and sleep without listening for trains. I rehearsed the call in my head, kept it simple, no drama, no long explanations. When she picked up, her voice sounded the same as always, calm, controlled, like nothing in the world ever surprised her. I told her what happened, the smoke, the notice, the deadline. There was a pause on the line, not shock, not concern. A pause like she was deciding how much time to give this. Then she said, "Ethan, you've always made choices that kept you right on the edge." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult me. She didn't have to. She talked about responsibility, about consequences, about how helping me would only delay a lesson I apparently still hadn't learned. She said it the way people say things when they're sure they're being reasonable. I remember staring at the wall while she talked. A small crack near the outlet, dust on the baseboard. I focused on those things so I wouldn't interrupt. When she finished, she sighed. Not like she was tired, like she was disappointed. "I love you," she said, "but this is something you need to handle yourself." The call lasted 7 minutes. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time with the phone still in my hand, trying to figure out when help started sounding like a moral failure. I didn't call her back. I didn't argue. There was nothing to argue with. She hadn't refused me out of anger. She'd refused me with principles. And principles are hard to push against. Later that night, I went in for my shift. The distribution center looked the same as always. White lights, concrete floors, the low hum of machines that never slept. I clocked in, did my job, didn't tell anyone what had happened. Around midnight, during the first break, I sat on the curb near the loading bay. That's when Caleb pulled up. We weren't friends, not really. He drove one of the routes that overlapped with my shift. We talked sometimes, weather, traffic, nothing personal. He rolled down the window and handed me a thermos. "Coffee," he said, "still hot." I hadn't told him anything. I hadn't asked. I took it anyway. A few minutes later, he asked where I was heading after my shift. I told him the truth, that I wasn't sure yet. He nodded like that answer made sense. "Ride with me," he said, "at least for tonight." There was no speech, no advice, no lecture about choices, just an open passenger door and a set of keys already in the ignition. I noticed the difference immediately. With Marianne, every word had a price. Every sentence came with a lesson attached. With Caleb, there was no meaning to unpack, no message hidden inside the help. He wasn't trying to teach me anything. He was just doing something. As we drove, he didn't ask questions. The radio stayed low. The road lights passed in a steady rhythm. I kept thinking about the contrast. One person had everything, space, money, security, and offered me wisdom. The other had none of my history and offered me a seat. That night, lying back in the truck while the engine ticked as it cooled, I I understood something I hadn't before. Advice is cheap when it costs the speaker nothing. It's easy to talk about self-reliance when you've never had to test it. Caleb didn't know my past. He didn't know my mistakes. He didn't know my family. He just saw a man who needed somewhere to be for the night, and that was enough. I didn't know it yet, but that quiet difference, the space between words and actions, was about to matter more than anything else in my life. 2 mornings after that call with Marianne, I started doing what I told myself I'd never have to do at 63. I started asking for work. Not sympathy work, not charity, just honest hours. I printed out resumes at the library because my old printer had died months ago, and I kept putting off replacing it. The paper came out warm and slightly curled at the edges. I smoothed each page like it mattered, because it did. I had a clean record, decades of steady employment, references that used to answer my calls on the first ring, and still, the first door closed before I even got my foot in. It was a small warehouse on the east side, right off the highway. A now hiring sign taped inside the window, sun-faded like it had been there too long. I walked in, filled out the application, and the manager barely looked up. He asked my name. I told him. His eyes flicked to the screen behind the counter, just a quick glance, like he was checking a number or a note or a warning. Then his whole posture changed. He leaned back and said, "We're actually fully staffed." I looked past him. 2 guys were loading boxes in the back. Another man was on a forklift. A fourth was arguing about overtime near the time clock. Fully staffed didn't mean anything. It was a sentence people used when they didn't want to tell you the real one. I nodded anyway, thanked him, walked out. In the parking lot, I stood beside my car for a full minute with my keys in my hand, just staring at them like they belonged to somebody else. I told myself it was one place, one bad timing, nothing more. So I tried again. That afternoon, I went to a grocery store that was short on overnight stockers. They'd been short for months. Everyone knew that. The clerk at the customer service desk even said, "Oh, we need people." I filled out the form, took the little interview in the corner office with the HR lady. She smiled too much, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. She asked where I lived. I told her. She asked why I was switching jobs. I kept it simple. Housing situation changed. I need something closer and steady. She nodded like she understood. Then she said, "We'll call you." I heard that sentence so many times in my life I used to think it was harmless. This time, it sounded like a door latch clicking. Because the next day, they didn't call. And neither did the third place, or the fourth. What was strange wasn't that I got rejected. What was strange was how similar the rejections felt. Same pause after my name. Same quick glance away. Same polite tone that suddenly got colder. Same phrase. "We'll keep your application on file." On the 5th try, I went somewhere I already knew. A loading dock supervisor named Ray, a guy I'd shared coffee with years ago, back when we were both younger and our backs didn't ache just from standing. When he saw me, he smiled, and then the smile slipped. It wasn't anger, it was discomfort. The kind people wear when they think they're being watched, even when they're not. He shook my hand, but it was fast, like touching something hot. "Ethan," he said quietly, "you good?" I laughed, because what else do you do when someone asks you that and you're not? "I'm fine," I told him. "I just need a spot. Anything on nights. I can start tomorrow." Ray looked past my shoulder, toward the open bay doors, toward the other workers, toward nothing and everything. Then he lowered his voice even more. "I can't," he said. I blinked. "Can't what?" I can't bring you in right now. Why? He hesitated. And that hesitation told me more than his words did. He wasn't deciding if he wanted to help me. He was deciding if he could afford to. I heard some things, he finally said. What things? He rubbed his jaw like he wanted to erase the sentence before it came out. Just stuff. That you've been having problems. That you're not stable. Stable. That word hit me harder than any insult could have. Because it wasn't a specific accusation. It was fog. It could mean anything. And fog is dangerous because people fill it with their own fears. I kept my voice calm. Ray, who told you that? He didn't answer directly. He just looked at me like he was apologizing without saying it. That's not true, I said. You know me. I do, he whispered. But you know how it is. I walked out before he could say more. The next part happened faster. I started noticing people not meeting my eyes. A neighbor who used to wave every morning suddenly pretended to be on a call. A woman from my old church, someone who used to hug me with both arms, smiled from a distance and kept walking like she hadn't seen me. Then the texts from family started coming in. Not messages like, "Are you okay?" Messages like, "Heard you're going through something," or "We're praying for you," or my favorite, because it was the most poisonous one, "If you need help, you should be honest about what's really going on." What's really going on? Nobody asked me directly. They asked around me. They asked each other. They traded little half-sentences until the story became more real than I was. I sat in Caleb's truck one night after my shift, staring at the glow of my phone, watching my own life get rewritten by people who weren't even in it. And that's when it clicked. Doors don't close that evenly by accident. People don't all start hearing things in the same week unless someone is making sure they do. It wasn't one manager with a bad mood. It wasn't my age. It wasn't my resume. It was a pattern. And patterns mean intention. Caleb didn't say much while I talked. He just listened, eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. When I finished, I asked the question that had been tightening in my chest for days. Who's talking for me? Caleb didn't answer right away. He tapped the steering wheel once, like he was counting beats. Then he said, "If someone's spreading a story, the worst thing you can do is give them a reaction to use." I frowned. "So, what do I do? Just let it happen?" "No," he said. "You stop feeding it." I looked at him. How? He kept his voice calm, practical. You don't confront yet. You don't post. You don't call 10 people trying to fix your reputation. That just tells the person doing it that it's working. He glanced at me just for a second. You go quiet, he said. But not helpless quiet. Strategic quiet. I didn't like how that sounded. It felt like surrender. But Caleb shook his head like he could read my thoughts. Impatience is what they're counting on, he said. They want you loud. They want you messy. They want you to look exactly like the rumor. He took a breath and slowed the truck as we hit a red light. Silence isn't weakness, he said. Silence is how you stay clean while they get sloppy. The light turned green. We rolled forward. And for the first time since the smoke drove me out of my home, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope, not relief, control. Because if someone was speaking for me, that meant someone was afraid of me speaking for myself. And that told me one thing. Whatever they were hiding was bigger than a few rumors. And it was close enough to smell. 2 nights after I realized the doors weren't closing by accident, Caleb did something that didn't feel like comfort. He asked a practical question. We were sitting in his old pickup outside the distribution center, engine off, windows cracked because the desert heat never really leaves. My phone was face down on the dash. I didn't want to see another just checking in text from a cousin who hadn't spoken to me in years. Caleb stared straight ahead and said, "When your parents passed, who handled everything?" At first, I didn't understand what he was reaching for. "My sister," I said. "Marianne." He nodded once, like he'd already guessed. "Did you ever see the will?" That word, will, landed in the cab like a dropped tool, heavy, loud, out of place. I let out a small laugh because it sounded ridiculous. "Yeah," I said. "I mean, there was paperwork. There's always paperwork." Caleb didn't move. He didn't smile. He just waited. And that's when I realized what he was actually asking. Not if I'd signed something, if I'd understood something. I swallowed and tried to pull the memory up like a file from a drawer that hadn't been opened in years. "My parents died 15 years ago," I said. "Back then, I was barely keeping my own life together." I didn't say it dramatically. It didn't need drama. That year I was coming off a divorce that scraped me hollow. I was living in a small rental, working long hours, sleeping in pieces. My brain felt like it was always one bad phone call away from shutting down. And then came the real bad phone call. First my mom, then my dad not long after. 2 funerals, 2 sets of condolences, 2 cardboard boxes of stuff nobody knew what to do with. I remember standing in Marianne's kitchen after the second funeral. Her house was spotless in that way rich houses are. No clutter, no dust, not even the smell of cooking. Just lemon cleaner and cold air. She handed me a mug of coffee I didn't taste and said, "I'll take care of everything. You don't need another burden." I should have heard the warning in that sentence, but at the time it sounded like mercy. Because when you're exhausted, you don't question the person offering to carry the weight. You just let them. Caleb watched my face like he was reading between the lines. "So you never sat down with a lawyer?" he asked. "No meeting, no reading?" I frowned. "That's not really how it went." He tilted his head. "How did it go?" And I started describing it, slowly, because the more I spoke, the stranger it sounded. "There wasn't some big family moment," I said. "No conference room, no folder opened in front of everybody. Marianne just handled it. She said the estate was complicated. Taxes, debts, medical bills. She used a lot of words that sounded official." I paused, trying to remember details I hadn't cared about back then. "She had me sign a couple things," I admitted. "I don't even remember what they were. She said it was just to authorize her to deal with accounts. She said it would save me time." Caleb's jaw tightened, just a fraction. "And you trusted her?" he said. "I did," I answered, and it came out sharper than I meant it to. Then I exhaled and softened it because the truth was worse than anger. "I trusted her because I was tired," I said. "I trusted her because she sounded confident and I didn't have any confidence left." Caleb nodded like that was exactly the point. Here's the thing people don't understand about inheritance. Most folks imagine a scene from a movie. Everyone's sitting together, a lawyer reading sentences like a sermon, the bad guy sweating, the good guy shocked. Real life is quieter. Real life is one person being the responsible one, the organized one, the one who shows up with a pen and says, "Just sign here." And if that person is appointed as the executor, or they position themselves like they are, They can do a lot before anyone even thinks to ask questions. Banks talk to them. Agencies talk to them. Paperwork flows through their hands first. Meanwhile, everybody else is grieving or working or trying not to fall apart. That's how people get bypassed. Not because they're stupid, because they're human. Caleb leaned forward and turned on the cab light like he wanted to see my expression clearly. "Ethan," he said, "did you ever get any statement? Any account numbers? Anything that showed what was there?" I stared at him. My brain tried to protect me by offering excuses. It was a long time ago. I didn't need the money. I didn't want to fight. But then another memory surfaced. Marianne sliding an envelope across the counter. A check. Not a huge one. Enough to feel like something, not enough to change a life. She'd said, "This is your share. Mom and Dad would want you stable." Stable. That word again. Like she was the adult, and I was the problem child who needed allowance. I remember thanking her, actually thanking her. Caleb went quiet for a moment, then asked the question that cracked something open in my chest. "Did it ever feel too neat?" he said. "Like it was wrapped up too fast?" I didn't answer right away, because the honest answer was yes. But I'd buried that feeling under grief and fatigue and the old belief that family doesn't do that to you. I looked out through the windshield at the dark lot, the distant glow of the freeway, the smell of dust and asphalt, and I said very softly, "I never even thought I was allowed to ask." Caleb sat back. "People think the easiest person to scam is the naive one," he said. "It's not." He glanced at me. "The easiest person to scam is the one who's depleted," he said. "The one who just wants things to stop hurting." I felt my throat tighten, not from sadness, but from the slow realization of what this meant. If Marianne had been willing to control my reputation now, if she had been willing to close doors in my face now, then what had she been willing to do back then, when I was too broken to pay attention? Caleb reached into the center console and pulled out a small notebook, worn, creased, practical. He held it out to me. "Start with the dates," he said. "When they died, where you were living, when you signed, what you received, any bank you remember, any attorney name, anything." I took the notebook like it weighed more than paper, because it did. It was the first step toward proving something I'd never wanted to believe. And as I flipped it open, one thought kept repeating in my head, simple and terrifying. If I was never invited to the table, it might be because the table wasn't meant for me to see. Follow this story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, because I still can't believe how far a lie can travel before the truth catches up. After that night in the pickup, after Caleb handed me that worn notebook and told me to start with dates, I didn't sleep right for days. Not because I was afraid of what we'd find, because I was afraid we'd find nothing. Because nothing is the most exhausting answer there is. Nothing means you imagined it. Nothing means you're still the foolish one begging for dignity that never belonged to you in the first place. So I started writing. I wrote the year my dad died, the month my mom followed. I wrote where I was living. I wrote the name of the bank I vaguely remembered from a check stub. I wrote the amount Marianne gave me, down to the last digit, because I could still see that number like a bruise. And Caleb didn't do what most people do when you're spiraling. He didn't tell me to move on. He didn't say, family is family. He didn't tell me to pray harder or forgive faster. He treated it like a problem that could be solved. The next morning, he showed up with a laptop that looked like it had survived a war, a portable scanner, and a thermos of coffee that smelled like something real. He set it all on the small fold-out table inside my mobile home, right beside the only window that wasn't taped up for smoke season. "You said Marianne handled everything," he said. "That means her fingerprints are everywhere. We just need to find where she forgot to wipe." I stared at him. How would you even know what to look for? Caleb paused. He didn't brag. He didn't make it about himself. He just said, "I used to do internal audits. Different life, same patterns." That was the first time he told me that, and the way he said it made me understand something. This wasn't curiosity for him. It was recognition. We started with what I had. A few old envelopes, a couple of tax forms, a faded letter from the probate court that I'd never really read back then because I didn't have the energy to decode it. Caleb scanned everything. He built a timeline on a blank sheet of paper like he was mapping a crime scene. Dates on the left, amounts on the right, names in the middle. Then he pulled up public records, property records, business registrations, any place where money leaves a trail for the government to see. At first, it was boring. I mean that in the most terrifying way. Because boring is what scammers depend on. Boring is how they win. They hide inside paperwork because most people don't have the patience to stare at numbers until they start speaking. But Caleb did. He stared. He zoomed in. He cross-checked. And then, 3 hours in, he went quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet. The kind where the room feels colder even though the air is the same. He tapped the screen and slid it toward me. "Ethan," he said, "look at this." I leaned in. It was a list of transfers. Not huge ones, not the kind that would set off alarms, small enough to feel harmless. But there were a lot of them. And they weren't random. They had a rhythm. Every few weeks, sometimes every few days. Always under a certain amount, like someone was trying to move a river 1 cup at a time. "What am I looking at?" I asked, even though my stomach already knew. Caleb pointed to a name on the receiving end. It was a holding company, a shell. A clean little business name that sounded like it could be anything. But the mailing address matched something else we'd pulled up earlier. A private mailbox rental, under Marianne's name. I felt my mouth go dry. She wouldn't be that stupid, I whispered. Caleb didn't look up. "People who think they're smarter than everyone get lazy," he said. "They stop imagining anyone will ever check." I sat back, the cheap chair creaking under me. Outside, a freight train passed by in the distance, low and heavy. The sound vibrated through the thin walls of my home like a warning. And all I could think was, how long? How long had she been doing this? How long had she been watching me struggle and calling it a lesson while she was living on money that wasn't hers? Caleb kept digging. He found a second pattern, a line of credit that didn't match Marianne's declared income, a purchase tied to a property she didn't own, except the payments said otherwise. Then he found something that made my blood run cold. A storage lease, not under my name, not under my parents', under that same holding company, same mailing address, same neat, invisible system. Caleb looked at me and said, "Do your parents ever mention a place like that?" I shook my head. "My dad hated storage units," I said. "He'd call them renting a closet for junk. He'd rather burn a thing than pay monthly to hide it." Caleb didn't smile, but his eyes sharpened. "Then it's not your dad's idea," he said. "It's someone else's hiding place." We waited until late afternoon. Smoke hung in the sky like dirty fog, turning the sun into a weak orange coin. Caleb drove. I sat in the passenger seat with my hands folded so tight my knuckles looked pale. We didn't talk much on the way there, because when you're driving toward a truth you avoided for 15 years, words feel too small.
The place was on the edge of town, tucked behind an old industrial strip where businesses came to die. A forgotten stretch of gravel road running parallel to the freight tracks. The kind of area you don't visit unless you have to. The kind of area you don't even want to look at. We stopped near a chain-link fence covered in sun-bleached warning signs. No trespassing, private property, violators will be prosecuted. Caleb cut the engine, and for a second all I could hear was the tick of cooling metal and the distant clank of a train. He looked at me. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. I swallowed. I thought about Marianne's voice on the phone, the calm cruelty, the way she made rejection sound like discipline. And I nodded. "I'm tired of being the only one who's scared," I said. We walked along the fence until we found the back end, where the brush was thicker and the cameras, if there were cameras, would have a harder time seeing through the mess. Caleb didn't move like a reckless man. He moved like someone who's learned to be careful the hard way. He pulled out bolt cutters wrapped in cloth so they wouldn't clink. One squeeze, a soft metallic pop. No dramatic snap, just a quiet break. And it hit me then. The truth rarely arrives with fireworks. It usually arrives with a whisper and a locked gate. Inside, the warehouse wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a modern facility. It was an old service building, half collapsed in places, with a rolling metal door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Caleb found the side entrance first, a rusted padlock. He didn't force it. He examined it like he was reading it. Then he pulled out a small keyring and tried 2 keys, before one turned with a soft click that made my stomach flip. I looked at him. "You just carry those around?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. He just said, "Sometimes people forget they gave you access." The door groaned when we pushed it open. The smell inside wasn't rot. It was dust and old cardboard, and that dry metallic scent of forgotten tools. Caleb's flashlight cut through the darkness. The beam landed on shelves, boxes, plastic tubs, a folding chair that looked like it hadn't been sat in since a different decade. And then, in the far corner, there was a small metal lockbox. Not fancy, not huge, just deliberate. Caleb crouched beside it, ran the light over it, and nodded like he'd been waiting for that exact shape. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it behind my ears. "This is it," I whispered, not because I knew, but because my body did. Caleb opened the lockbox. Inside were 3 things: a USB drive, a stack of bank printouts and scanned documents in a manila folder, and an old cassette tape in a clear plastic case with my father's handwriting on the label. My throat tightened so fast I couldn't speak, because I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it on birthday cards, on the back of family photos, on notes he'd leave on the fridge.
Caleb held the tape up carefully, like it might shatter. "What's it say?" he asked. I leaned closer. The ink was faded, but still readable. "If Ethan ever needs to know, play this." For a second I couldn't breathe. All those years, all that silence, all that maybe I'm overreacting. And my father, my quiet, stubborn father, had left a voice behind like a candle in a dark room, waiting for the day someone finally admitted they needed light. Caleb pulled a small portable cassette player from his bag. I stared at him again. "You came prepared," I said, voice shaking. He slid the tape in. The player clicked, the spools turned, and then, through a soft hiss of static, my father's voice came out of that tiny speaker.
Older than I remembered, tired, but steady. "If you're hearing this," he said, "it means something happened. And I'm sorry you had to find out this way." I froze.
The air felt thick. The flashlight beam stayed fixed on the dusty floor like neither of us wanted to move and interrupt what was about to be said. My father took a breath on the tape, like he was choosing his words carefully. "I don't know who's sitting with you right now," he continued, "but I hope it's someone you can trust. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't going to sound like the family you thought you had." And right then, standing in that dark warehouse near the train tracks, with smoke in the sky and dust on my shoes, I realized something I should have understood a long time ago. The truth almost never lives in bright places. It lives in the corners, in boxes, in things people lock away and hope you're too tired to open. And for the first time in years, I wasn't too tired anymore. 2 days after we played my father's tape in that dusty warehouse, Caleb told me we needed to do one thing before we did anything else. "We're going to see her," he said. "Not to scream, Not to beg, not to threaten, just to look her in the eye and ask questions she can't answer without revealing herself." He said it like he was talking about checking the weather. And that's when I realized how much my life had changed. Because a week earlier, I would have rather swallowed broken glass than sit across from Marianne Brooks with a steady voice. Now, I wanted to hear what she would call her cruelty this time. The Investor Club was on the clean side of town, where the roads got smoother the closer you got to money. Palm trees trimmed like decorations, a parking lot full of cars that didn't look like they'd ever seen dust. Inside, everything smelled like cologne and polished wood, soft music, quiet laughter, the kind of calm that comes from not worrying about rent. I walked in wearing my best jeans and a button-up shirt that still carried a faint scent of smoke no matter how many times I washed it. Caleb stayed 2 steps behind me, not like a bodyguard, like an anchor. Marianne was exactly where I expected her to be. At a table near the window, half turned toward a group of people who were nodding at her like she was the smartest person in the room. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. Her confidence did the talking for her. When she saw me, her smile didn't drop. That was the first warning, because most people, if they were shocked, would show it. But Marianne didn't look shocked. She looked irritated, like I had tracked mud onto her clean floor. She stood up slowly, smoothing her blazer, like she was preparing to handle an inconvenience with grace. "Ethan," she said, as if we had just spoken yesterday, "I didn't think you'd have the nerve to come here." I nodded once. "I didn't either," I said. And then I did something that felt almost unnatural. I didn't explain myself. I didn't apologize for being alive. I didn't talk about the wildfire, the eviction notice, the weeks of sleeping in a borrowed room. I just pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Caleb didn't sit. He stayed standing, quiet, hands folded in front of him, eyes scanning the room the way a man scans a road at night. Marianne looked at him. "And who is this?" she asked. "A friend," I said. Her smile tightened. "Of course," she said. "That's what you do. You find people to take you in." There it was. Not anger, a diagnosis. She spoke like I was a character flaw that needed correction. I leaned forward slightly. "I came to ask you a few questions," I said. She made a small sound, like a laugh, but not quite. "You're 63, Ethan," she said. "You should be asking yourself why you're still in this position." I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my voice flat. "That's not one of my questions," I said. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Because she was used to me reacting, She was used to me defending myself. She was used to being the judge and me being the defendant. I opened my phone and turned the screen toward her. Not dramatically, just enough. On the screen was a photo of the storage lease, the holding company name, the mailing address. Her name connected to it like a stitch. Marianne didn't flinch. She didn't even look down at it at first. She looked at my face, and she sighed, like a teacher tired of a slow student. "Are you done?" she asked softly. "Because you're embarrassing yourself." That's when I understood something that had taken me 15 years to learn. Some people don't feel guilt. They feel annoyance. They don't regret what they did. They regret that you noticed. I swallowed and asked the question anyway. "Did you ever think to tell me what Mom and Dad left behind?" I said. Marianne finally glanced down at the screen, just a quick look. Then she pushed the phone back toward me with one finger, like it was dirty. "Your parents didn't leave much," she said. "And what they did leave, I handled, like I always have." I nodded slowly. "Handled," I repeated. "Meaning what?" Her eyes narrowed. "You always do this," she said. "You take a situation and you twist it until you can play the victim." I didn't move. I didn't argue with the word victim. I just asked another question. "Why is there a holding company using your mailbox address?" I said. She laughed again, a little sharper. "You've been talking to the wrong people," she said. "You're letting strangers fill your head with ideas." Then she leaned in, voice lowering like she was offering me wisdom. "Listen to me," she said. "I'm your sister. I'm the only person who actually cares enough to tell you the truth." And that sentence is how Marianne always entered the room. Not as a thief, not as a bully, as a savior. She continued, calm and confident. "You've made bad choices," she said, "over and over. You married the wrong woman. You never aimed higher. You stayed comfortable. And now, life is finally catching up." She gestured around us, at the club, the people, the polished wood. "This is what discipline looks like," she said. "This is what building something looks like. You don't get to fall apart and expect other people to carry you." Then she smiled, like she had just delivered a sermon. "And I'm not going to enable you. There are insults you can brush off, and then there are insults that come dressed as virtue. Because when someone calls you worthless, you can hate them. But when they call you worthless and label it love, you start hating yourself. That's why people like Marianne are dangerous. They don't punch you. They convince you that you deserved the bruise." I took a slow breath and looked at her. "You know what's funny?" I said. "If you had just said you didn't want to help me, I could have accepted that." Her smile held, but it stiffened. "But you didn't," I continued. "You had to make it a lesson. You had to turn your refusal into a moral high ground." Marianne's eyes hardened. "Because it is a lesson," she snapped. "Someone needed to teach you. Clearly your parents didn't." That one landed like a slap. I felt Caleb shift behind me just slightly, but I stayed still. I let the moment sit there. I let the words echo in my head. Someone needed to teach you. And suddenly my father's voice from that tape came back to me. The tired steadiness, the regret, the warning. I looked down at the table, the clean linen, the small glass of water Marianne hadn't touched, the napkin folded like perfection. And I realized Marianne didn't hate me for being broke. She hated me for being evidence.
Because as long as I existed, I proved something she didn't want to admit. That her success wasn't just hard work. It was theft. I raised my eyes again. "One last question," I said. She lifted her chin, waiting.
When Mom and Dad died, I asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me to come with you to the attorney? Why wasn't I ever asked to sign anything? Why did everything happen through you?" Marianne's jaw tightened, and for the first time, her calm cracked. "Because you were a mess," she hissed. "Because you couldn't handle it. Because if I hadn't stepped in, everything would have fallen apart." Then she leaned forward, voice sharp enough to cut. "And if you're thinking you can drag me through the mud with some little paperwork and a sob story, you're out of your mind." She glanced around, aware of the room again, and lowered her voice. "You don't have the money," she said. "You don't have the credibility, and you don't have the kind of friends who matter in places like this." I sat back. I didn't smile. I didn't threaten her. I just let her words hang in the air like smoke. Because she had just confirmed something without realizing it. She wasn't speaking like an innocent person. She was speaking like someone protecting territory. And that was my aha moment. Not the documents, not the bank transfers, not even my father's tape. It was hearing Marianne use the word credibility like a weapon. Because that's how manipulators win. They don't defeat you with facts. They defeat you by making sure nobody listens to yours. I stood up slowly. Marianne watched me, satisfied, like she had just put me back in my place. But I wasn't there to win the argument. I was there to measure the lie. And now I had what I needed. Before I turned away, I looked at her one more time. "Marianne," I said quietly, "you don't sound like someone who's trying to help." Her smile returned, cold, controlled. "You'll thank me later," she said. "You always do." I walked out of that club with Caleb beside me, the air outside hot and smoky, the parking lot shimmering in the sun. And I realized the truth is this. If Marianne had cursed me out, I might have stayed angry. But she did something worse. She tried to make her cruelty sound like love. And that's when I stopped wanting her approval. Because you can't heal in the same place someone keeps calling your wound a lesson. And I knew, walking back to that old pickup, the next time I came for her, it wouldn't be with questions. It would be with paperwork. And time. And a boundary she couldn't talk her way around. 3 days after I walked out of that investor club, I didn't feel brave. I felt clean. Not happy, not proud, just clear. Because for the first time in years, I stopped trying to win Marianne's approval with explanations. And I started building something she couldn't talk her way out of. Caleb didn't let me spiral. He didn't let me rehearse speeches in my head. He didn't let me go back and try one more time like I used to. Instead, he pulled out a small notebook from his glove box and set it on the dashboard like it was a tool. "Dates," he said, "amounts, names, one thing at a time." That's when he told me the truth about himself. Before he ever drove a pickup for night routes, he'd been an internal auditor for a regional logistics company. The kind of job where you stare at numbers until they start telling the truth. He didn't talk about it like a badge. He talked about it like a scar. "I left because I pointed out fraud," he said, and they didn't like the pointing. I looked at him and asked the question that had been sitting in my throat for days. "So you're helping me because you can't stand her?" He shook his head. "I'm helping you because I recognize the pattern," he said, "and because you don't deserve to be erased for somebody else's comfort." That word
erased, hung between us. Because that's what Marianne had been trying to do. Not just take money, not just control the story. Take my voice. Caleb had already printed copies of the bank scans we pulled from that USB.
He lined them up on a cheap motel desk like evidence in a courtroom. Then he opened a folder with screenshots of property records, shell companies, and a timeline he'd built late at night while I slept. One page had a list of dates with short, brutal notes beside each one. Dad died, Mom died, estate filed, holding company formed, property purchased, account transferred, and right in the middle, my divorce paperwork, my lowest year, my foggiest year, the year I was tired enough to let someone handle it. I stared at that timeline until my eyes burned, and I realized something else. Marianne didn't steal when she was desperate. She stole when I was weak. That's why people like her don't look for opportunity. They wait for it. Caleb found a local attorney through a friend of a friend, not a flashy downtown lawyer with a billboard. A quiet woman in a small office near the courthouse with a stack of files taller than her coffee mug. She didn't gasp at my story. She didn't tell me I'd be okay. She just asked questions and wrote everything down. "How long has she controlled access to the estate?" she asked. 15 years, I said. "Were you ever formally notified of probate proceedings?" she asked. I swallowed. "No," I said, "not that I remember." "And when you asked her for help after the wildfire?" she asked. I hesitated. "Help," I said, "or a place to sleep?" She looked up at me. "Say it exactly," she said. "A place to sleep," I repeated. Caleb slid his phone across the desk. On it was the audio recording from the warehouse. My father's voice, not dramatic, not angry, just careful. And then Caleb played another clip, a short one, a voicemail that had come in 2 nights after the investor club. It was from an unknown number, no name, no greeting, just a man's voice saying, "Stop asking questions. People get hurt out there on the tracks." I felt my stomach drop. The attorney didn't react like I expected. She didn't look scared. She looked focused. "Do you still have that number?" she asked. Caleb nodded. She wrote it down. Then she leaned back and folded her hands. "Here's what we're going to do," she said. And for the first time, I heard the shape of a boundary in real words. Not feelings, not family. Law. She explained it plain. A formal demand letter, a request for records, a notice that any harassment or threats would be documented and forwarded to the appropriate agencies. And if Marianne tried to move assets, hide accounts, or intimidate me, that becomes part of the case, she said, and it makes her situation worse. I sat there listening, and I felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Not because the problem was solved, because I finally wasn't solving it with my emotions. That night, when we got back to the motel, Caleb watched me pace. I kept thinking about what people would say, what relatives would whisper, how Marianne would spin it, how she'd call me ungrateful, how she'd say I was attacking her. And Caleb said something that stuck with me. "Rage is loud," he said, "but paperwork is louder in court." 2 days later, the attorney sent the letter. It was simple, cold, professional. A timeline, a request, a deadline. 48 hours to respond and produce documentation. No insults, no moral arguments, no "you hurt me." Just, "This is what we have, this is what we're requesting, and this is what happens next." When I signed it, my hand shook. Not because I doubted the truth, because I knew what I was doing. I was closing a door I'd kept cracked open my whole life.
People misunderstand boundaries. They think boundaries are punishment. They think boundaries mean you're trying to hurt someone back. That's not what they are. A boundary is a fence you build after you've been trampled enough times to realize kindness without limits becomes permission. I wasn't doing this to destroy Marianne.
I was doing this so she couldn't destroy me. That's the difference. The first response came fast, not from Marianne, from one of our cousins. He called twice, then texted. "What are you doing, Ethan? She's saying you're trying to extort her." Extort. I stared at that word and almost laughed, because it was so perfectly her. She didn't deny, she reframed. She didn't answer questions, she attacked character. And it worked on people who didn't want to think too hard. Then Marianne called. I watched her name light up my screen, and my body did what it always did. My chest tightened, my throat went dry. My old self wanted to pick up and explain, to calm her down, to prove I wasn't a monster. Caleb didn't touch my phone. He didn't tell me what to do. He just said, "If you answer, you're back in her game." So I let it ring. Then she texted, "You have 24 hours to stop this before you regret it." I saved it. Screenshot, date, time, And I realized something right there, standing in that motel room with the air conditioner rattling and the smell of stale coffee in the air. Boundaries don't make you lose people. They make you lose illusions. The illusion that Marianne was harsh because she cared. The illusion that if I just found the right words, she'd soften. The illusion that family meant safety by default. The next morning, the attorney called us in. Marianne's lawyer had responded, not with records, with threats. They claimed defamation. They claimed harassment. They demanded I stop contacting her client. It was meant to scare me, to make me feel small again. But my attorney smiled slightly and slid the letter back across her desk. "This is good," she said. I blinked. "How is that good?" I asked. "Because it confirms she's more interested in intimidation than transparency," she said. "And it means she's already thinking about exposure." Then Caleb leaned in and tapped the timeline on the desk.
"And look at the date on their letter," he said quietly. It was dated 1 day after our demand. They moved fast. Too fast. People who are innocent don't rush to threaten. They rush to clarify. And that was when the board shifted. Because Marianne didn't just react. She revealed. She showed her hand. And now I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't chasing shadows. I had a trail, a timeline, and a boundary that didn't require her permission to exist. And for the first time since the wildfire took my home, I wasn't asking to be let back in. I was deciding what happens next. Follow this story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this has reached. Because what happened next wasn't cinematic. It wasn't loud. It was paperwork and waiting, and learning that justice moves at the speed of a file number. The first week after that demand letter went out, nothing big happened. No flashing lights outside my motel. No dramatic confession.
Just a silence that felt like a test. My phone stayed face down on the nightstand, and every time it buzzed, my stomach did the same thing, tightened like a fist. Caleb kept me busy on purpose. Every morning we sat at the little motel table with 2 paper cups of coffee and a legal pad between us. He'd write the date at the top. Then we'd go line by line, 1 transfer, 1 property, 1 fake company name, 1 account number that didn't match the previous statement. It felt boring, and that's exactly why it worked. Because when you're dealing with someone like Marianne, drama is a weapon they understand. But records don't care how confident she sounds.
2 weeks later, our attorney filed for an emergency preservation order. She explained it in simple terms. If there's a chance she destroys evidence or moves assets, we ask the court to freeze the playing field, she said. That sentence hit me harder than any insult Marianne ever threw.
Freeze the playing field. That's what I'd needed my whole life. Not sympathy, not an apology. Just a fair ground to stand on. A few days after that, the first real shift happened. Caleb and I were sitting in his truck outside the courthouse when our attorney called. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the edge of satisfaction under it. The judge granted a temporary hold, she said. Certain accounts are flagged. A motion to freeze is in progress. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I looked down at my palms like they belonged to someone else. All those years I'd been told I was irresponsible, that I made bad choices, that I couldn't be trusted with anything. And now, a judge, someone who didn't know our family, didn't care about our family, was saying, "No, we're not letting this disappear." That was the moment I realized something. Truth doesn't need to yell. Truth just needs a place to land. Of course, Marianne didn't take it quietly. She didn't call me crying. She didn't try to explain. She went right back to her favorite tool, control. First, she sent a message through her lawyer offering a settlement, a number that sounded generous to someone who didn't know the truth, a number that would have felt like a miracle to the version of me from 3 months ago. But Caleb read it once and slid it back. "That's not a settlement," he said. "That's hush money with nice fonts." Our attorney agreed, and she did something that changed everything. She asked for a forensic accounting review. I'd never even heard those words before, but she explained it like this. People can lie to family, they can lie to friends, they can even lie to a room full of relatives. But numbers leave footprints, and footprints tell a story. Once that request was approved, the process got heavier. Not faster, heavier. Because now every small thing mattered, every signature, every document, every time a property changed hands. Every time a company was formed and dissolved like it was just smoke. I thought back to my parents' old cassette, my dad's voice measured and careful. "If you're hearing this, it means I wasn't there to protect you." I used to hear that line and feel sad. Now I heard it and felt resolved. Because maybe he couldn't protect me then, but I could protect myself now. A month went by, then another. And if you've never been through something like this, let me tell you what those months feel like. They feel like waking up every day and trying to act normal while your entire future sits in someone else's hands. They feel like answering texts from relatives who suddenly just want peace. They feel like walking past people who used to smile at you, people who now look through you like you're a problem. And still, no fireworks, just the steady grind of truth moving forward inch by inch. Then, one afternoon, we got the call that Marianne had been brought in for questioning. Not arrested yet, questioned. And that difference mattered. Because it meant the system wasn't reacting to my emotions. It was reacting to evidence. Our attorney asked us to come in. When Caleb and I walked into her office, she had a stack of papers on her desk and a look that told me she'd been up late. They found inconsistencies, she said, multiple. And then she slid one page toward me, a document with my name on it, a signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Because forgery isn't just stealing money. It's stealing your identity. It's turning your life into a permission slip someone else signs for you. That was when the case stopped being a family dispute. That was when it became what it always was, a crime.
2 weeks after that, Marianne was placed under monitoring. I didn't see the moment it happened. I didn't get to watch her walk into a courthouse in slow motion. I found out the way most real people find out.
Through a short email from our attorney. 3 sentences, no drama, just facts. An order has been issued, conditions have been set, contact is restricted. Caleb looked at me when I read it. I expected to feel victorious. I expected to feel like I'd won. But all I felt was tired. A deep, bone-level tired that comes from carrying something too long. That night, I sat on the edge of my motel bed and listened to the trains pass behind the building. One after another. Same rhythm, same distance. And I realized this is what people don't tell you about justice. It doesn't always feel like a celebration. Sometimes it feels like finally putting down a heavy box and noticing how bruised your hands are. There was no champagne, no cheering, no moment where the sky opened up and everything made sense. There was just a quiet stretch of time where I could breathe without checking over my shoulder. And that's when it hit me. Real justice isn't entertainment. It's release. It's not about watching someone fall. It's about finally being able to stand. 6 months after the smoke cleared, I didn't recognize my own life. Not because it became glamorous, not because I won some fairy tale ending, but because the fear finally stopped living in my chest. Caleb and I found a small piece of land outside town, not far from the freight tracks, but far enough that the rumble felt like background noise instead of a warning. It had a trailer on it that leaned a little, and a patch of dirt that looked like it had given up on grass years ago. To most people, it would have looked like nothing. To me, it looked like a place where no one could lock me out. We moved in slow. A thrift store couch, 2 mismatched kitchen chairs, a cheap set of curtains Caleb hung like he'd been doing it his whole life. He didn't talk much while he worked. He just did the work, and somehow that was louder than any speech. The first morning there, I woke up before dawn out of habit. For a second, I forgot where I was. I waited for the panic, the urge to check my phone, the old feeling that something bad was about to happen. But all I heard was a kettle starting to hiss, then the soft clink of 2 mugs. Caleb didn't knock. He didn't announce himself like it was a favor. He just set a thermos on the table, poured coffee like it was the most normal thing in the world, and nodded at the chair across from him. That was our routine after that. Not big talks, not therapy sessions. Just a quiet kind of loyalty that showed up every day. And I started to understand something I should have learned years ago. Family isn't the people who share your blood. Family is the people who don't use your worst day as proof you deserve it. Some relatives reached out when the news got around. Not with, "I'm sorry," more like, "Let's put this behind us," or, "You know how Marianne is," or my favorite, "You should forgive, it's family." They said it like family was a law, like it was a contract I signed at birth and could never cancel. But I'd already seen what that contract cost me. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I kept my answers simple. I'm doing okay. I'm focused on moving forward. I hope you're well. And then I let the call end. Because here's what I learned. Peace isn't something you negotiate with people who benefit from your silence. Peace is something you build and protect. A few weeks after we moved in, I took the cassette out one last time. The plastic case was scratched. The label was faded. My father's handwriting looked smaller than I remembered. I sat at the table with it in my hands while Caleb fixed a loose step outside. The sun was coming up, and the trailer smelled like coffee and sawdust.
I thought about everything that tape had carried. Not just my dad's voice, but 15 years of questions. 15 years of being told, in 1,000 little ways, that I didn't matter as much. I didn't play it.
I didn't need to. I already knew what it said. I wrapped it in a clean cloth, placed it in a small tin box with my papers, and slid it into the back of the closet. Not to forget. To close the door. There's a difference. Some people think closure looks like forgiveness, like a hug, like tears, like everyone sitting around a table admitting they were wrong. But sometimes closure looks like a quiet morning where no one is trying to control you. Sometimes closure is just safety. And if you're watching this, and you're in that place right now, where you're staying quiet, keeping notes, watching patterns, waiting until you're steady enough to move, listen to me. You're not weak. You're not being dramatic. You're not overthinking. Sometimes silence isn't fear. Sometimes silence is strategy. Because the people who manipulate you count on one thing. They count on you reacting before you're ready. So if you're holding your tongue, if you're gathering yourself, if you're choosing the long road instead of the loud one, that's not losing. That's you taking your life back, one calm decision at a time. And one day, when it's quiet again, you'll realize the thing you were chasing wasn't revenge. It was freedom. And it feels a lot like a cup of coffee on an ordinary morning with the right person sitting across from you.